The morning of my 16th birthday, my mother did not wish me a happy birthday. She handed me a basket of mending and told me the hems on my brother's trousers needed fixing before supper. That was it. No cake, no ceremony. Just an ordinary Tuesday with an extraordinary weight quietly settled onto my shoulders, a weight I would spend the rest of that year trying to understand. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway holding that basket, the morning light still gray through the window, and feeling something shift in the air of the house itself, as though the walls somehow already knew something I did not yet understand. I did not know it yet, but turning 16 in our community was not simply a birthday. It was a door swinging open. And on the other side of that door was a version of freedom that terrified me more than any rule ever had. My name is Miriam. And this is the story of why 16 in an Amish community is the age every girl quietly dreads, not because anything bad happens on that birthday itself, but because of what it sets in motion. I need to explain something about our community first, because outsiders often misunderstand this completely. Turning 16 was the beginning of Rumspringa, the period of relative freedom given to young people before they choose baptism into the church. People outside our world hear this word and imagine something wild, something scandalous. That is not quite right, and it is not quite wrong either. What Rumspringa actually meant, in the quiet reality of my own community, was something far more complicated than freedom or rebellion. It was the beginning of an enormous, unspoken clock. Before 16, a child's path is simply given to her. You wake, you work, you attend church, you obey. There is no decision required of you, and in a strange way, that absence of decision is its own kind of peace. After 16, everything changes. You are handed, gradually and without any single dramatic announcement, the responsibility of choosing your entire life. Whether to be baptized, whether to remain in the only world you have ever known, whether the freedom now available to you is something to explore or something to fear. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think this is the part outsiders miss entirely. The fear was not about what might happen during Rumspringa. The fear was about the size of the choice waiting at the end of it. The first thing that changed for me was the work. Almost overnight, my chores multiplied. I want to be precise about this, because I do not think people understand how literal this shift is. Before 16, I helped my mother. After 16, I was expected to function as a nearly complete household worker in my own right, capable of running an entire kitchen alone, capable of managing a full day's canning or quilting or laundry without supervision. The community's assumption shifted overnight from "she is learning" to "she should already know." Nobody explained this shift to me directly. I simply woke up one Tuesday and found the basket of mending waiting, and understood, in the way you understand weather, that something fundamental about how I was seen had already changed. I remember the particular exhaustion of that first year. Not physical exhaustion exactly, though there was plenty of that too, but a kind of quiet astonishment at how quickly the safety net of childhood had been removed. One week I was a girl who could still make small mistakes in the kitchen and be gently corrected. The next week, seemingly overnight, mistakes were met with a different kind of silence, one that expected I should have already known better. The second thing that changed was how people looked at me. This is harder to describe, but I will try. Before 16, I was simply a girl among girls, indistinguishable in the eyes of the adults around me from my younger sisters. After 16, I began to notice a different kind of attention. Mothers at gatherings would glance at me and then glance, briefly, toward their unmarried sons. Older women would ask me questions about my domestic skills with a particular interest that had not existed the year before. I was being quietly, wordlessly evaluated, not for anything I had done, simply for having crossed an age. I remember the exact evening I first understood what was happening. I was at a youth gathering, one of the singings that young people attended on Sunday evenings, and I noticed a boy from a neighboring district watching me with an attention I had never received before. Nothing happened. He did not approach me. I did not speak to him. But I understood, with a kind of cold clarity, that I had entered a new category of visibility. I was no longer simply a child in the eyes of my community. I was now, whether I felt ready for it or not, someone who could eventually be courted, eventually be chosen, eventually be someone's wife. I was 16 years old. And I felt, for the first time in my life, the full weight of an entire future being quietly assembled around me, built from expectations I had not agreed to and had barely had time to understand. The third thing, and this is the one that frightened me most, was the freedom itself. Rumspringa meant that some of the strictest boundaries of my childhood loosened. I could, within limits, attend gatherings that mixed more freely with the world outside our community. I could make small choices that had been entirely closed to me before. And I discovered something I had not expected. The freedom did not feel like relief. It felt like standing at the edge of a very large field in the dark, being told I could walk in any direction I wanted, with no clear sense of where safety actually was. Because underneath all of that new freedom sat the enormous ticking question that every girl my age carried quietly. Would I choose baptism? Would I choose this life permanently, with my eyes open, the way it needed to be chosen? Or would I be one of the small number who left? I want to ask you something right now. Have you ever been given a freedom you did not feel ready for? A choice so large that having the option to choose felt heavier than simply being told what to do? That is exactly what turning 16 felt like. Not oppression, the opposite. An almost unbearable amount of open space with a decision waiting at the far end of it that would determine the entire shape of my life. I spent the 2 years of my own Rumspringa carrying that question quietly, the way I think most girls in my community did, even the ones who seemed outwardly carefree at the singings and gatherings. We did not talk about the fear directly. That was not something girls said out loud to each other, but I could see it, sometimes, in the particular stillness that crossed certain faces during the quiet moments between the noise and the laughter. I recognized it because I felt it too. I chose baptism eventually, at 18. I want to be honest that this is not a story about leaving. That is a different story, one I have not told you tonight. This is a story about the specific fear that sits underneath turning 16, whether a girl ultimately stays or eventually goes. The fear of suddenly being handed the full weight of your own future, all at once, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, with nothing more ceremonial than a basket of mending to mark the occasion. I think about that morning often. My mother handing me the basket without a word, without wishing me a happy birthday, because in her mind, I suspect, she was not withholding something from me. She was simply passing along the same silent handoff that had been passed to her and to her mother before that. A quiet transfer of weight from one generation of women to the next, never named directly, understood completely. I wonder, sometimes, what it would have meant if someone had simply said the quiet part out loud. If my mother had sat down with me that morning, before the mending and the chores, and said plainly, "Today, everything changes, and I am sorry no one prepared you for how much." I do not think it would have made the weight any lighter, but I think it might have made me feel less alone underneath it, in that first strange year of carrying something so large without a name. I want to ask you something before I go tonight. Is there a moment in your own life when you were handed a freedom or a responsibility you did not feel ready for? When the size of a choice in front of you felt heavier than any rule ever had? I believe that feeling, wherever it comes from, deserves to be named honestly, instead of carried in silence the way we carried it in my community. You are allowed to feel the weight of your own becoming. I felt it at 16, in a basket of mending on an ordinary Tuesday. I hope, wherever you felt it, you have found someone to say it to.